Hello friends, welcome back to a new video. In this session, I want to talk about the way the democracy has been interpreted in the contemporary media, and also, is democracy the ideal solution or the one thing that fits for all kind of thing for all the countries? Is it true or not? Whenever we see at the visual media or at maybe when we read the books related to the polity, economy, and even when we read things that are being taught in the schools and colleges, you always get a feeling that democracy is the ideal pinnacle for every society. But is it so? What does history tell about it? That's what I wish to point out to. First and foremost, if you look at the all the countries that has come up in the world as the pinnacles of democracy today, are at one point of time were not the ideal pinnacles of democracy. Rather, during their initial phases, they have been quite a bit autocratic, quite a bit undemocratic, and quite a bit imperial also. But from there onwards, if you see that they began a kind of a shift towards democracy, and at one point of time they reached that pinnacle, and that is when the common public began to enjoy the fruits of democracy. Rather, they began to believe that power is actually originating and radiating from them. Okay, for example, I will tell you, say, just look at, say, Germany, or just look at, say, France, or Britain itself has democratic traditions, but technically it's a monarchy. But if you look at these countries, for instance, and if you say just look at, say, countries like, say, Italy, or if you say countries like this Indonesia, where at one point of time they were much more liberal, much more considered as kind of socialist. But what is the present scenario now? Italy is one of the worst performing continental European nations, one among the part of the pigs, if you say, that is Portugal, Italy, Greece, and Spain, not well performing in the Euro. And if you look at Indonesia also, they are much less performing than their counterparts of like say Malaysia, Singapore also, which has been much more authoritarian than Indonesia at one point of time. So what exactly matters? Does democracy makes a one fit for all? No. And I will tell you the reason also. Even if I forgot to tell one other nation, that is none other than US, the biggest democracy in the world. And that at one point of time had itself seen a bloody civil war between the northern states as well as the confederate states in the south. And at that time, Abraham Lincoln never looked into the morality and constitutionalism. Rather, he somehow made sure that unity will be stamped even if it with an iron fist. So we have always seen this thing, because it's the initial phases when the diverging tendencies are more. You need some kind of a unifying force which can be authoritarian at one point of time, that may not be too much of democratic and by the book principled or liberal, but such people are very much necessary, because through that only some decision, even though tight, can be made, and in the longer run its fruits can be distributed among all the kind of people. For example, say in Germany, Kaiser William the second, and even before that there was Bismarck, who actually made sure that unions were some way arm twisted and industrialization was done. But lately Germany got benefited, right? The same thing can be said about, say, Abraham Lincoln during the time of the Civil War, and even say Napoleon at one point of time, through his banking system, roads, polytechnics, and all. Lately, even made the cementing foundation for the French Republic. And if you look into Singapore, there was the Lee Kuan Yew, can never be termed as someone who is democratic. If you can look at his interviews, he has said, like, if there is the people are not performing well, voting out the government and bringing someone new, how will it change the equation? Rather, he was not at all a democratic kind of a person, much more authoritarian. And if you look and say Mahathir Mohamad, these were authoritarian people. But look at the situation of a common man in Singapore and Malaysia and compare it with their counterparts in Indonesia. You can see a sea of difference. So that's what I would to say. Even just look at the case of India. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, he was not democratic. If we would have been democratic, you could have seen an enclave like Hyderabad in India. India could have been balkanized. That's the reason why he is even termed as the Indian Bismarck, right? So that's what I wanted to say. Don't get carried away and swayed away by the fact that democracy is one thing that fits for all. And I will tell you a very recent example. If you look into the Middle East and the Maghreb nations, there was this Tunisia from there, this rebellion, revolution kind of thing happened in the Islamic world, right from 2011 onwards. But that itself gave rise to much more despotic forces like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and created more ruckus than the problems it actually solved. Why? Because the society itself was not ripe enough for democracy. So you have to understand, democracy doesn't mean people voting and electing the governments. It is basically a culture that is within. If the general public and the society is not ripe for democracy, just this process won't bring stability or economic development or even peace to that country. That is one thing that you have to understand very, very clearly. That's the reason why I have actually taken the examples across the spectrum, from America to the Europe to the Middle East to the Southeast Asia, and just even beyond that, say for Japan, for example. Was Japan a democracy during this kind of industrialization and the Meiji Restoration? No, even it's still not a technical republic because it's a monarchy. So that is why I always say, initial point of time, all these kingdoms require some powerful people, maybe some monarchs, enlightened despots who can arm twist certain democratic principles and make initial framework and the base for the economic development. And little by little and little by little, at one point of time, when the time is ripe, the people should be given more freedom to choose and more democratic devolution. That's what I wish to say about in this session. So that's what I want to say. Don't get fooled that democracy is like one thing that fits for all. Thank you. Take care and have a nice day.